Hello, thanks for joining us today for part two of our discussion on site selection and monitoring for IVD clinical studies. In part one, we discussed site selection, and in the second video, we will be discussing monitoring for IVD studies. I'm joined by my colleagues, Brandy and Manali. Brandy is the Senior Director of Clinical Operations, and Manali is a highly skilled clinical research associate at RQM Plus with specific expertise in IVD studies. Thanks for joining today. So monitoring, let's get into it. What do we need to know when we are monitoring IVD clinical trials?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Manali to kind of add some more detail. But I think with all monitoring, and we have talked about this in some other discussions, there's the risk-based monitoring approach that we can take. So we can take on-site monitoring as well as remote monitoring. And especially in these diagnostic studies, we can really think about leveraging remote monitoring. The source documentation review can be a little less intense than other types of studies where there might not be the same kind of medical history and source document review, in which case we can work with the sites to kind of see things in real time based on what's happening in the EDC and working with them to understand, how things are being done and give them real-time feedback. So it can be really nice to have that remote real-time approach to monitoring. But on the other hand, the site interaction and being on site to see how things are done and get a real sense of how everyone is talking to each other, how the communication is happening, just kind of see how the storage facility looks and, get that sense is good. And it really shows a nice partnership and collaboration with the site if we're willing to spend the time, face to face with them. So there's really like pros and cons depending on the type of study you're working on and the approach that you want to take to be able to support them. So Manali, can you please add from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So based on my monitoring experience, monitors have a lot of visibility when they do the source data verification. But I also wanted to consider here to have a periodic processes of data cleaning with the data management. So when we do the source data verification with the EDC, we do have we do verify everything, but we might not have ability to see the instrument data, or there may be special software requirement, right? So a lot of times there are a lot of gaps that we discover later on when we involve in a data cleaning. So I would recommend to have periodic data cleaning processes as well. Example, something like that. On the paper record, site says that they have run the control, but maybe they fail to validate the results on the instrument, right? Whether it's a valid positive or negative. And they run lots of clinical samples afterwards. If they fail to ensure the validation, then a lot of data we cannot utilize for that. So I highly encourage having a good collaboration with the data monitoring team. Another thing is sometimes sample may not be tested in a correct time frame. That is another thing. Your source data and EDC data may match, but when you look at the instrument data, then you may seem there is a stability gap or a time frame gap. So it's really important. And other thing to consider when you create the case report, like when you design the case report form, consider all these things that all these risks that you wanted to monitor, right? So other major challenge is about sample accountability and IO material kit accountability. Having this monitoring on periodic basis, whether it's a weekly or monthly, is really important. This is not only identifies the compliance issue at the early stage, but also really important. Sometimes site fails to keep their inventory tracker. So sometimes they cannot enroll patients because they don't have inventory on hand, because usually it takes sometimes sponsor or CRO tries to get the inventory within like 48 hours, but sometimes that's not the case. So it's really important to have this monitoring in real time as well. The other aspect that I wanted to mention about like risk-based monitoring, right? So a sponsor should evaluate the types of risks that they anticipate into their trial processing as well as data, and depending on that, consider how much risk-based monitoring they wanted to wanted to allocate for the studies, right? So of course, 100% monitoring for ICF, because those are more majority concerns regarding patient safety. But other source data verification, that could be done 10% to up to 100%, depending on the complexity of the study. But also, in addition to that, having that in a monitoring plan, CRS should utilize their good judgment of so for example, when studies start initial stage, having 5 to 10 subjects, 100% monitoring until to ensure that site has a good understanding about the study and good documentation and things like that, and then gradually follow the monitoring plan.
So great insights there. Do either of you have any final thoughts on monitoring or on site selection?
Just say, I think this comes through based on the discussion that we're having, but there's really no one size fits all approach. And it's not like we can say, well, this is an IVD trial, so we're going to do it this way. And this is, a device trial, we're going to do it this way. It really depends on so many factors. And even this discussion we're having about monitoring, everything that Manali had mentioned is dependent on the availability of, looking at it remotely or needing to be on site, the type of devices we're looking at, and, the types of people that we need to work with. So it always takes some upfront planning to be really detailed and understand what exactly you need and what those risks are, so we can mitigate them from the start.
Yeah. And I want to add a little bit about feasibility questionnaire. So we always try to have build our feasibility questionnaire in right manner, but sometimes that does not allow sites to showcase their abilities, right? So always following up if you for clarification with the sites, it's really important. Also, in terms of competing studies, I would say that when you talk about competing study, you sponsors or CROs should always think bidirectionally, because studies that do not just compete on a study population, right? So some sites might be having competing study, but really sometimes other sponsors might have cap on their enrollment rate, but they do have capability in terms of enrolling more subjects, or that other study might have a different sample size. So it's really asking the sites questions for more clarification really helps.
Sure. And having monitors who really understand the process and the IVD landscape, right, is super helpful in that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, great discussion today. Thank you guys for joining, and we will be talking again soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks,
Manali.
Yeah, thank you.